stories about the Foreign Office. One of my favourites is to do with George Brown. You'll all remember George Brown. He had two sins, neither of them wholly unknown to the political classes today. One of them was love of a glass of whiskey, and the other was an attraction to a pretty face. I suffer from neither, I should tell you. There's a story about him going down to sign an Anglo-Peruvian trade deal. So they're flying down to sign the deal. And afterwards there was a little reception, a cocktail party. So he walked in, he saw a very beautiful woman in the corner of the room with a long red dress that came down to her ankles. So he had one whiskey and he had a second, and I suspect, Chris, that Foreign Office records may even have revealed that he had a third and perhaps a fourth. And they started to play some music, so he thought he'd go and ask this very beautiful woman with a long red dress that came down to her ankles if she'd like to dance. And he told her over to her, our foreign secretary. And he said, "Madam, would you like me to dance?" And she said, "No, for three reasons. First of all, you are drunk. Secondly, this is the national anthem. And thirdly, I am the Cardinal Archbishop of Lima." This is my sixth book. I love writing, I really adore it, and I've got another on the go now. I was getting under my wife's feet about 18 months ago and in the kitchen, not that I'm often there, and she said, "Go away and write a book." And I said, "What am I going to write about?" She said, "Well, write about your life." I said, "I can't. I've written 2 volumes of diaries covering my political life." And she said, "No, write about your life." And so I decided I would do that. So this is not, ladies and gentlemen, a political biography. You may think it's a good time to have not a political biography. Indeed, some sniffy people have sort of suggested that it didn't have enough politics in it, including Roy Hattersley. I'm delighted by that, and it's done the sales no harm, I can tell you. So it covers my life, of course, as biographies must, at school. Interesting experience with a math teacher when I was 14, female math teacher, I should say. But I leave you to read that. And of course in the Royal Marines, which I joined at the age of 18 after my parents left with all my brothers and sisters to emigrate to Australia. I was a delicate young man, as you may well know. A little herbivore. So the Royal Marines were something of a clash with what I was used to. I remember my drill sergeant once discovered that in my kit I had more than the regulation 3 bits of lavatory paper. And his response was, "3 bits of shithouse paper, sir, that's all your arsehole needs. 1 up, 1 down, and 1 to polish." Then we got involved in all the little post-Empire wars at the end of Empire. The first actually wasn't really a war, but we thought it was going to be. I was in Karachi one day on HMS Bulwark and in the bar with some friends, and somebody came in and said, "The Iraqis have invaded Kuwait, 4 tank divisions, it's about 40,000 men, and a lot of tanks. And we've got to go and drive them out." And I said, "We in whose army?" There were about 500 of us in the commando at the time. However, we bundled on board, this is the first Iraq crisis of 1961, thundered up the Gulf to go and drive these Iraqis out with 500 Royal Marines and 40,000 Iraqis and a great deal of tanks, and I was very nervous. This was my first thing, as you might imagine. We had a mad colonel who brings young officers together on the quarterdeck of HMS Bulwark and said, right, when we've driven these Iraqi fellows out, we have to win the hearts and minds of the Arab Johnnies. And I have decided that the way we'll do it is put on a show of Scottish country dancing." I learned the Exon reel at 46 degrees centigrade, thundering up the Persian Gulf on the quarterdeck of HMS Bulwark, wearing an army blanket for a kilt. Thank God when we got there, the Iraqis had not arrived, the thin red line held. Then we had 2 little other wars, one in Borneo, there's a lot here about jungle warfare, and I joined the Special Boat Service and developed some of the techniques which we used for underwater operations in other people's territory. One of the things we had to do was learn how to parachute. I detest parachuting. I must have done 70 or odd jumps, I suppose. I've never brought myself to be able to believe that jumping out of a perfectly serviceable aircraft and flying off the ground on the basis that the thing on your back is veritably a parachute and not a collection of dirty socks. That's the sensible thing to do. At the end of my time, I decided I'd go and learn Chinese, and spent 2.5 years living with the Chinese and learning their language. Not a difficult language, Chinese. It has a complication too, in fact. One is the written script, which is very difficult. And the other is that the language is monosyllabic. So each word has a different tone. If the word, you take the word my, there's my, and my. There is a point to this, which we'll get to in a moment. If you want to buy something, you say my, and if you want to sell it, you say mine. So it's quite important to get the tone right. And the Chinese absolutely adore it when a foreigner trying to say something polite says something completely disgusting. On this occasion, I'm sitting around the Chinese language school dinner with my Chinese language school teacher, a Peking convent-educated lady of a certain age, and all my fellow students and all my teachers are there, and I meant to say to her, Madam Ma, have you ever flown an aircraft? Have you ever sat in a flying machine? Is the literal Chinese translation. Madam Ma, have you ever flown an aircraft? But I got the tone wrong and asked her whether by any chance she'd ever sat on a flying penis. The rest of the table completely collapsed around me. My problem was it was another 6 months before I got to that bit of the Chinese. So I hadn't even a clue what I'd said. Then I joined an organisation I'm not allowed to name, because when I joined it I made a lifetime's promise that I wouldn't in British intelligence, but I suspect most of you will probably be able to guess what it was. I was recruited into it as a quotes member of the Foreign Office and spent 4 or 5 years in Her Majesty's Secret Service. When I joined, they said, we want you to make an undertaking, you never reveal the name of the organisation, so I did, or indeed anything that we did. Our headquarters at the time were just south of the river, the other side of Westminster Bridge, quite close to Lambeth North Tube Station. I'm not allowed to say that. I'm allowed to say that now because they're not there, they've moved further down. On this occasion, we lived in a 13-storey, we worked in a 13-storey tower block on Westminster Bridge Road. And we were all told to go very carefully and discreetly as we went to the front door, particularly the Russians might be watching. We didn't actually have to put on a beard or anything, but we had to look as though we weren't going there and sort of dart in the door, in case the Russians were watching. All of this was slightly spoiled by the fact that the London bus conductors of the 159 bus that I still catch in every morning to the House of Lords would love to announce, and did announce as they arrived at Lambeth North Tube Station, in a very loud voice, Lambeth North Tube Station, all spies alight here. Something that the Russians probably got to know. And then we were in Geneva, 1974, 2 elections, 3-day week. My wife and I decided that we would go into politics, not just politics, liberal politics. Not just liberal politics, but in my own hometown of Yeovil. Well, this was a stupid decision to take, ladies and gentlemen, by any standard. When I was elected, when I was chosen, because no one else put their hand up to do it, as the Liberal candidate for Yeovil in 1976, first of all, the seat had been held with the Tories since 1911. They didn't didn't count their majorities, they weighed them. Secondly, my party was standing in the opinion polls nationally was 5%. Thirdly, we were famous for losing our deposits whenever we stood. And fourthly, my leader was about to be arraigned for a conspiracy to murder at the Old Bailey. And you think it's bad now. I spent 8 years winning my seat. Actually, to be serious for a moment, it was a really important time, learning the techniques and skills of being a constituency member of Parliament, which I loved. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. It was the pinnacle of my life when I was elected. Slightly against the expectations on the 9th of June 1983. But by the time I got to Parliament at 42, I'd been a soldier, I'd been a spy, I'd been pretending to be a diplomat, I'd been a businessman, I'd been a youth worker, I'd been unemployed. And all of those things served with a magnificent apprenticeship for the job I then did. And if there's a serious thing wrong with politics today, and there is, and a lot of it, some of it is the fact that far too many of our politicians, and all our leaders, go into politics in short pants, have never done anything else but politics.